Welcome back to Harvey's Highlights. Sit down, get comfy, and let's talk about one of the most powerful moments ever to happen on Family Feud. Over the years, Steve Harvey has seen it all. From the wildest wrong answers to the funniest family rivalries, there's hardly a situation he hasn't faced. But in April of 2024, something happened that took the show far beyond the realm of laughter and entertainment. It was a moment that made millions of people see television, and each other, a little differently. What started as a normal game show taping turned into a national conversation about inclusion, empathy, and the power of simply stopping long enough to listen. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Family Feud studios. The audience had already been warmed up by the crew, the lights were blazing, and the set had that familiar energy that always filled the room before Steve Harvey walked out. On that particular day, the two families competing were the Torres family from Austin, Texas, and the Baker family from Nashville, Tennessee. The Bakers were a lively bunch, cracking jokes, waving to the cameras. But the Torres family had a different kind of energy, a quiet confidence and unity that made them instantly memorable. Among them was the youngest sister, 28-year-old Lena Torres, who was deaf. Lena wasn't born deaf. When she was 10, she lost most of her hearing after a severe case of meningitis. Since then, she had used both sign language and lip reading to communicate. Her siblings had learned sign language with her, and when they applied for Family Feud, the producers made special arrangements to ensure she could fully participate. An interpreter sat just off camera, translating everything Steve said into ASL, and everyone had gone through extra rehearsals to make sure the timing would work. Steve Harvey had been briefed ahead of time, and he was excited. He loved when different kinds of families came on the show. It reminded him how diverse and beautiful the world really was. When he first walked out and greeted the Torres family, he gave Lena one of his signature big grins and a wave. "Now see, that smile right there," he said, pointing toward her. "That's the kind of smile that wins games." The audience cheered. Lena smiled back, signing a quick thank you through her interpreter. The first rounds were everything you'd expect from a great Family Feud episode. Laughter, shouting, playful teasing. The Bakers took the early lead, but the Torres family quickly caught up. Every time Lena got a turn, she impressed the audience with her quick wit and charm. When Steve asked, "Name something people do when they think nobody's watching," she immediately signed back, "A dance like Beyoncé." The interpreter voiced it for her, and Steve nearly doubled over laughing. "Girl," he said between chuckles. "That's exactly what I do when I'm alone in the mirror. Except mine looks more like James Brown after 2 espressos." The audience roared. By the time the game reached fast money, the Torres family was leading. The Bakers congratulated them warmly and took their seats to watch. Marco, Lena's older brother, went first for the Torres team. He scored 118 points, a solid performance. That meant Lena would have to bring in 82 points to hit 200 and win the $20,000. She stepped up to the podium, smiling but visibly nervous. Steve, as always, tried to make her comfortable. "You ready, sweetheart?" he asked. The interpreter signed his words. Lena nodded and signed back, "I'm ready." The crowd clapped and cheered as the familiar music started and the big timer appeared on the screen. Steve looked down at his card and read the first question. "Name something you might forget when you're in a hurry." He said it clearly, but as he spoke, Lena's eyes darted between his mouth and the interpreter. She was reading his lips, but the timer had already started counting down. She hesitated, then answered, "Keys." Steve nodded quickly and read the next question. "Name something that makes a loud noise." Again, the clock ticked, but she was still processing his lips. "Thunder," she said, her timing just a beat off. Steve moved to the next one, speaking carefully but still under pressure. The buzzer sounded before the final question was even fully asked. The audience gave polite applause, but something felt off. Lena smiled, but her face showed a flash of frustration. Steve could see it. He looked down at his card, then back up at her. Normally, at that moment, they would have moved straight into revealing the answers, but instead, Steve raised his hand slightly and looked toward the camera crew. "Hold up," he said. "Hold up 1 second." The studio went still. "Lena, sweetheart," he asked gently, You got all them questions okay? Her interpreter relayed the question, and she shook her head. Not all, she said through the interpreter. It's hard when the clock starts before I can read the question. The crowd went quiet. Steve blinked and looked over at the producer's desk. Wait, so you didn't even have the same amount of time as everybody else? She shook her head again. It's fine, she signed. I'm used to adapting. Steve leaned on the podium, his expression serious now. Nah, he said. See, that's the problem right there. You shouldn't have to adapt to unfair. The audience murmured, sensing something special was happening. Steve turned to the producer booth. Y'all, she lost time reading the question, didn't she? One of the producers nodded, half whispering through the comms. Yeah, maybe half a second each time. Steve nodded slowly, then looked back at the audience. You hear that? Half a second. Don't sound like much, till you realize that's the difference between winning and losing. He turned back to Lena. Let me ask you something, sweetheart. How long does it usually take you to process a question when someone's talking? She signed. About a second. I can read lips well, but if someone's moving fast, I lose a word. Steve nodded, thinking. Then he set his card down and said, Well, that's enough for me. We're gonna do this again. And from the top. New timer, but this time, we start that clock only after the interpreter finishes signing the question. Fair? Lena's eyes widened. You don't have to do that, she signed. But Steve shook his head firmly. Yes, I do. Because right now you ain't losing because you didn't know the answers. You losing because we didn't give you the same shot to answer 'em. And I can't stand by for that. The audience erupted into applause. Even the Baker's family stood up cheering. Steve motioned to the crew. Reset the board. We doing this the right way? The interpreter nodded, the timer reset, and Steve stood beside Lena again. All right, he said, smiling now. We ready? When I finish saying the question, you start signing, and then we start that clock. Let's go win you this money. The music started again. Name something you might forget when you're in a hurry. The interpreter signed, and Lena answered instantly. Wallet. Name something that makes a loud noise. Fireworks. Name something you do before going to bed. Brush your teeth. Name. Something that can't be bought. Love. Name. Something that makes people feel safe. Family, the buzzer sounded and the crowd went wild. You could feel the energy shift. It wasn't just applause for a good game, it was applause for justice. Steve was grinning from ear to ear. Now that's what I'm talking about, he shouted. They turned to the board. Wallet brought in 37 points. Fireworks scored 24. Brush teeth, 15. Love, 14. Family, 12. That made 102 points, bringing the total to 220. The Torres family had won. The room exploded in cheers. The Torres family screamed and hugged. Lena's interpreter was wiping away tears. Steve walked over to Lena and hugged her tight. You just taught all of us something today, he said. She signed back. Thank you for stopping. Steve shook his head. No, sweetheart. Thank you for making me stop. The cameras were still rolling, but Steve wasn't ready to move on. He turned to the audience. I want y'all to hear me for a second, he said into the mic. We all came here to have fun. But what just happened? That's real life. We think fairness means treating everybody the same. But sometimes fairness means making space for how people are different. That's what this young lady showed us today. The audience gave him a standing ovation. When the show finally wrapped, Steve stayed on stage for a few minutes, talking quietly with Lena and her family. He told the producers to keep the entire exchange in the final broadcast. Don't cut it, he said. People need to see this. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, it became one of the most viral moments in Family Feud history. The clip of Steve stopping the game and redoing the round was shared tens of millions of times in the first few days. Hashtags like Aus Family Feud Fair Play and Nos Deaf Awareness were trending on social media. The comments section was filled with gratitude. As a deaf viewer, seeing this made me cry. Steve didn't just listen, he understood. I'm not deaf, but this showed me how small changes can make a huge difference. This is how you use your platform. The National Association of the Deaf released a public statement. praising the show for its immediate and authentic response to accessibility in action. News outlets ran headlines like "Steve Harvey stops the show to make TV history." But for Steve, it wasn't about publicity. On his talk show the following week, he opened with a simple reflection. "You know, I used to think being a good host meant keeping the show moving. But sometimes, being a good host means knowing when to stop the show. That day I realized communication ain't just about talking, it's about understanding." Family Feud quietly began making changes after that. They introduced new accessibility protocols for future contestants. Interpreters were allowed on stage during lightning rounds. Timers could be adjusted for lip readers, and written versions of questions were made available for anyone who needed them. In interviews, Steve said it was the easiest decision they'd ever made. "We ain't doing anybody a favor," he said. "We just making sure everybody's got the same shot to shine." Lena Torres became something of a symbol in the deaf community. She did interviews, spoke at schools, and started a campaign called Let Us Play, encouraging other shows to think about accessibility for game show contestants. "It's not about special treatment," she said in one segment. "It's about equal opportunity to participate fully, to laugh, to compete, to belong." Months later, Family Feud invited the Torres family back for a special Champions of Inclusion episode. When Steve introduced them, the crowd erupted. He greeted Lena with a huge grin and a hug. "You know what I tell people, Lena," he said. "I tell them you taught me how to hear better, and I ain't even got my ears checked." She laughed, signing back, "You listen with your heart now." At the end of that special episode, Steve took a moment to address the camera directly, just as he had done months earlier. "I've been hosting this show a long time," he said, "and I thought I'd seen everything. But this year reminded me something important. Inclusion ain't just a word. It's an action. It's stopping to make sure everybody's part of the laughter, not standing outside it." The clip closed with a shot of Lena signing, "Thank you, Family Feud," and Steve signing back, "We love you." That tiny moment, a few hands moving in sync, became a symbol of respect and understanding that resonated across millions of viewers. Today, that episode is still used in schools and diversity programs as an example of accessibility done right. But for Steve Harvey, it all comes down to something simple. In an interview later that year, he said, "You know, I used to think inclusion meant big statements or grand gestures. But that day, I learned it can be as small as saying, 'Hold up, let's make this fair.' That's all it takes sometimes. One moment to make somebody feel seen, Lena." Torres didn't just win her family. In $20,000, she helped change how one of America's longest-running game shows looks at fairness. She reminded millions that equality doesn't always mean sameness. It means adjusting the world so that everyone gets to stand on the same stage. And for Steve Harvey, a man who has made a career out of laughter, that day taught him that the most powerful moments on Family Feud aren't the funny ones. They're the ones that make us stop. Think and listen. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that inclusion isn't complicated, it's human. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible, true-to-life moments that show how empathy, awareness, and simple fairness can change everything.